What's going on with savant brains? My theory of savantism is that these are individuals with extremely low general genetic quality. So they have genomes that are full of mutations, but they're trying to pursue a slow life history strategy. So they are unable to execute the adaptations necessary to canalize an effective slow life history strategy. So what they do is they produce a broken slow life history strategy with certain highly exaggerated slow life history characteristics, including these autistic-like traits that are taken to these very extreme levels. And what we call cognitive differentiation effort that people with slow life history should in fact have very specialized repertoires of cognitive ability, because this reflects a kind of ecological niche splitting tendency, a tendency to seek out and become a specialist as a way of cooperatively competing with other specialists under high population density conditions, which characterize more case-selected environments. And the result of this, of course, is division of labor, and you get sort of competitive release, and you can raise the carrying capacity of the environment. So when you have sort of very high levels of mutations in your genome, and you're highly developmentally unstable, you try to develop slow life history characteristics, but they come out defective. Sorry, but isn't autism a fast life history trait? No, autism is a slow life history strategy trait. Read Marco's work. But it's associated with high testosterone. No, testosterone is not part of the life history continuum. It's associated with a behavioral complex, or syndrome of traits, which position them very definitely on the slow end of the life history continuum. Schizotypal behavior, with its verbal tilt, and hypermentalizing, and hypersexuality, this is fast life history. But isn't that part of hypermentalizing, over-empathizing, basically? Empathy is a slow life history trait, right? Yes, it is a slow life history trait, but schizotypal people are hyper-emotional. They are not hyper-empathizing, actually they are characterized by a poverty of affect. They are aromantic, and they are incapable of forming social attachments. What they are, however, is hyperlibidinous and hypersexual, and they're hyper-emotional, and they require emotional investment from others. They need emotional supply from others, which is why they also tend to be quite high on some of these dark triadic traits, supply-side traits such as narcissism, where they need approval and all this sort of thing. And they are emotionally labile, meaning that they tend to be quite unstable. If you've ever interacted with full-blown schizotypal people, and I knew one person when I was an undergraduate who was a full-blown schizotypal, they are completely incapable of even the most basic form of affective attachment. Even social attachments are beyond them. They cannot form that kind of social bond you get with a good friend. They are absolutely incapable of that. These are all fast life history traits. Autistic people are actually capable, ostensibly based on the current syndromology of autism. They are actually capable of forming strong attachments to both places and people. What they are very, very bad at doing is reading social situations. So they're very bad at being able to respond to emotional cues and incentives in their environment. They do what they are capable of doing, however, is forming strong bonds, and they often get very rooted, very attached to places, and very attached to things in particular. I've been talking about schizotypy. This is not the same as schizophrenia. Schizotypes are nasty, schizophrenics are crazy. So to round this back to the question, savantism is a form of extremely defectively executed slow life history type personality. The defective genes are preventing the successful canalization of its slow life history phenotype, leading to exaggerations of certain aspects of this, including the ability to develop extreme cognitive specialization, and that's one thing savants are characterized by are extreme memory feats. So the ability to recreate objects from clay, for example, after just looking at them once. Or the ability to draw an entire cityscape. These are famous examples of so-called idiot savants, although you're not meant to call them that anymore. Intellectually disabled savants, essentially very famous examples of these individuals who can do these incredible memory feats, but on IQ tests the score is about 70 typically. It's very, very, very low, but they have this one niche ability in which they put all of their cognitive effort, all of the differentiation effort. All this low life history sort of squirreling away of resources has gone into cultivating that one specialized ability, because they can't develop a more even profile. They can't develop in other ways, essentially because of the genetic handicaps that they have. The sequence of readings on this should be: start off with Crespi and Babcock, who wrote a paper in Behavioral and Brain Sciences BBS, which is a very good paper, where they talk about these two being the schizotype and autistic-like personality being two opposing sides of the same coin. There's Marco Del Tudicchi wrote, who's an evolutionary psychologist now with the University of New Mexico. In 2011 wrote a paper in which he integrated Crespi and Babcock models into evolutionary psychology, and in so doing he developed this idea of a continuum of life history traits, where you have slow life history, sort of autistic-like psychopathologies, and then you have fast life history, schizotype-like psychopathologies. And Marco recently wrote a book on evolutionary psychopathology. It's a very, very good book. I'd strongly recommend reading it. So a shout out there to Marco and his book. It's a really exquisite piece of work. He's very, very talented. What Marco does is he takes this continuum model and he uses it to look more broadly at psychopathology, so he looks at other forms of psychopathology as well: depression, anxiety disorders, things like executive disorder, which is a fascinating condition where you have a sort of defective frontal lobes. And it means that you start randomly associating. It gives you this heightened ability to do this free association, and you produce these sort of nonsensical ideations. Like all of a sudden you might start combining random words together, and you might produce some sort of weird word salad type of thing. All of these things he looks at in the context of this sort of evolutionary developmental. He's more on the sort of developmental side, the Siva de Ver, as it's called, framework, whereby you can look at these things as manifestations of an underlying life history continuum, essentially. So it's really good, and it's a huge step forwards from this manual of madness, as James Thompson calls it, which is the DSM, and its variants with this. You have these ad hoc clusterings of these personality deficiencies, essentially based on some, group B, group etc., dramatic type disorders, whatever. You have an ersatz clustering of these things in a way which doesn't necessarily make sense. You can look at this as a continual model, and you use evolutionary theory to make sense of this variegation.